Here. All right. So today our topic is market research and analysis, go-to-market strategies. And I'm excited because we've got some great experts who've been around the block and have a lot of stories to tell. And I'm your host, Jim West. I'm the Associate Director here at BioTools Innovator. And again, with me today, we've got David Kavanaugh at DeciBio, Amanda Holden at I5 Biopartners, and we've got Kim Negrin presenting as an independent consultant, but also with Catalent. And I'm going to let you each go through and introduce yourselves. So, David, can we start with you?
Yeah, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. I'm David Kavanaugh. I'm the co-founder and partner at BTI Consulting. Our firm specializes in precision medicine. About 75% of what we do is bespoke consulting projects that really revolve around go-to-market strategies. So a lot of this topic is near and dear to my heart. We also have a lot of off-the-shelf data products like market reports that cover a lot of research tools, industries, et cetera. And then last, we actually have a venture fund. We've actually invested in BioTools alumni companies. So yeah, that's our firm. We're sort of all in on precision medicine and the BioTool space. So excited to be here.
So, you know, a good strategy and a bad strategy when you see it.
For sure. Yeah, I've seen both, and both from a strategy perspective, but also as an investor perspective. So.
Awesome. Amanda, could you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Happy to be here. I'm Amanda Holden-Sinisi. I'm a founding partner of I5 Biopartners. We are a specialized consultancy firm focused on commercialization of life science tools and technologies. And I have a lot of global experience as well as different types of experience outside of life science. I had a very long career at Cisco in product management, product marketing, also worked in various organizations in Germany. And so I have done many, many, many GTM strategies and many, many, many product launches. So I'm really excited to share my experiences with you all today.
Awesome. Awesome. Can't wait to hear. And Kimberly, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, awesome. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. Really excited to be here. I guess a little bit about me. I am here as an independent consultant. I'm very passionate about the enterprise of science and how we can bridge the gap between science and business. And I started my life in academia by training. I have a PhD in immunometabolism. I've had a really unique and exciting career history, mostly in the life science tools. I've launched and sold many products into the market, including capital equipment and consumables and biologics and services. And I've also had the opportunity to wear many hats. And so from applications to sales to product management, commercial leadership, corporate strategy, the culmination, I guess, of my experience has provided a unique perspective that I'm excited to share with you today and get to work with my esteemed colleagues. So thanks for having me.
That's great. And one of the questions I have about this topic is when we look at sort of life science tools, which is where our focus and companies are there any unique aspects of that market that sort of differentiate themselves from maybe other types of industries and market strategies? So we'll get there, but before we dive in, I just want to sort of reiterate. So our format here is a 1 hour webinar. We live stream the first hour, and then as we close out, we reserve 30 minutes that's not live streamed. That's reserved for the cohort, so they can ask any sort of questions and answers. So when we're done, don't run away. So I'd like to start off, and the question I want to start off with is, you know, for people who haven't really been through this before, you know, what is a go-to-market strategy? How do you define it? Is it a document? Is it a piece of paper? Is it something else? Like what actually is a go-to-market strategy? And anybody who wants to take that on first is welcome to jump in.
I can jump in first. I mean,
Okay.
it's kind of all those things. So fundamentally, a go-to-market strategy is your roadmap to getting your bio tool into the hands of the right users. So you're detailing a plan that's going to outline how your company is going to bring your product or your service to market, and it will provide you with a structured framework to navigate the complexities of launching that product into life sciences. And in biotools, we have a super complex product. We've got sophisticated clients. We've got seemingly unpredictable market dynamics. And so your go-to-market strategy is really important to set yourself up for success. And you wouldn't go on a hiking expedition without a map and supplies and a clear destination. And so a go-to-market strategy is very similar.
Awesome. Well, then the next kind of question is we've got a two-tier topic here. We've got the go-to-market, but we've also got kind of market research. Also, some of our companies maybe have never done or seen real market research. So how does market research, what is it, and how does it feed into a go-to-market plan? David, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I can take this on because this is probably our bread and butter. So as a firm, a lot of the work we do is voice of customer research, with usually with direct potential customers or actual customers. So that might be academia. We do a ton of work in biopharma. That's sort of become an area where a lot of biotools companies have been pursuing. Usually have biopharma is known to have deep pockets, and tend to be pretty sticky when they adopt technologies. But yeah, a lot of what we do is actually go out and talk with biopharma R&D directors, principal investigators, could be a core lab director, et cetera, and really understanding sort of what technologies they're using for a certain application. It really depends a bit on the project as to how we structure that. But our conversations usually start out very open-ended, understanding, say, hey, what are you using? What technologies are you using for certain applications? How happy are you with them? What vendors are you using? Pluses and minuses. What are unmet needs? Where are there gaps? And then often introducing, potentially a target product profile from a company that wants to get feedback on their product. And then going through that, we usually do that research blinded, but sometimes we do it unblinded. So that's a very typical approach, something we do a lot. And then that really feeds into, our go-to-market to think about, what should be a beachhead application and how do you differentiate that product from competitors, all of those things. And then we probably, that's sort of where, our work sort of ends at the strategy piece. And then I think it goes to, my esteemed colleagues here who often take that and move it into a more operational, actionable, tactical plan.
Amanda, what kind of data do you look at and consider when you're kind of feeding into and developing your market strategy?
It's a great question. I think it really depends on the product or the service that the customer or client is offering. So, geography, I mean, you can start at a high level and you can go, geography, market segments are hugely important. And in fact, just a little nit on this, I think it's one thing that a lot of companies don't focus on enough is how to segment properly, and what markets they should actually be focused on. I think they have very generalized views of, I'm going to start in academia or I'm going to go into industry, but those are much too large, and really getting down into the segmentation aspect of it all is really important. So, depending on what type of research you're doing will determine the factors that are involved. But, you could go from top to bottoms up. And I'm going to reiterate what David said. I think with DeciBio focusing mostly on voice of the customer, you really need to make sure that you have customer feedback on every step of the way when creating your GTM, when creating your product launch checklist, et cetera.
So the inexperienced way to build a business is I've been studying this for 20 years. I'm in a lab. I've been publishing. I've been in all these publications. I know what I'm doing. I'm ready to build the product. You guys say, well, let's maybe look at the data before we commit all those resources.
Yes.
Your market research is going to validate the market need, right? So you might think that you have a cool tool, but the purpose of market research in your go-to-market plan is, really to make sure that we're not just building a cool tool, but we're solving a real problem. And so we need to have those insight on our market need, our product market fit, our competitive landscape, our ideal customer. So all of that is what we're going to be researching and putting into our go-to-market strategy.
Yeah, and putting the founder hat on, that also sounds like it's pretty important for your fundraising strategy as well.
Yeah. And just to piggyback on what Kimmy was saying, while all those things are absolutely important, it's also important to validate each step, right? So not only just taking everything for a grain of salt, but really testing it, verifying it, making sure it's the right data in order to move forward.
And I
Right.
think Jim,
Yeah.
I think Jim, you raised this question in the beginning around, how is tools or biotools different than other markets, and what and sort of opportunities and challenges. I think the opportunity is that in our space, you see a lot of university spinouts, technology transfer out of university from an academic professor, principal investigator at a university, interesting technology. You often can see that built into a prototype product with relatively low capital, which is fantastic. I think we've seen that with a lot of the biotools companies where $1 to $2 million of capital and there's a prototype that's really fantastically capital efficient. But the challenge then can be is it's sort of a shiny object looking for an application. And we see this a ton with companies where it's like, oh, we can do XYZ, and I think I call it like being drawn and quartered. They sort of often the company gets pulled in all these different directions. You can have a lot of different agendas. Sometimes there's research grants that the professors are pulling on that may not be really commercially viable, but they're pet interests of the principal investigator. So, our work is really to step back and say, look, where are you the best at something? And it doesn't always have to be the biggest market, even if you're putting your investor hat on. It's just where can you win, and why? And then it's really developing that thesis around that, and then it goes into all these other things of like creating the data that supports that, and creating then the marketing and value propositions, and all the positioning, all the things that really can drive that home. But I do think that we are in a unique market where we can build tools that can be used in a lot of applications, but that if you don't really do the homework to understand, which application is the one that's the best fit for your, it's really the product market fit, right? A lot of people talk about this in tech. It's really finding where your product has the best product market fit and where you're going to get traction. And I've seen a lot of companies die on the vine because they were going in different directions. They were excited, we have a customer interested in this. We have a principal investigator in X, Y, or Z. And then all of a sudden they don't have enough data. And then when they try to go out and fundraise, they say, investors say, well, I don't really know. I'm not really seeing enough traction in sort of anything to really put money behind this. And now they can run into issues, with running out of capital.
That's great. And I think a lot of our companies that I've talked to are in that boat. It's like, we've got a pickaxe. We're selling the pickaxe. It's definitely useful for gold and other minerals, but your point is, well, should you be in California or Louisiana or, where is the application that you're going to do the best? So that's really helpful. Kim, oh yeah,
I
go
might
ahead.
add that what problem are you solving, right? So I think that's a big question. You could have a nice new shiny object, or it works in this lab and it also works for this PI, but really, what is the problem you're solving, and how many people have that problem that will relate to what you're selling?
Yeah. So Kimberly, I have a question on you for you. So when you're building these strategies, kind of it's a two-part question, but one, when you kind of get to I guess the launch phase of the strategy, how fixed is the plan? Do you see them changing or modifying as you kind of go forward? And the second part of it is when you're developing these kind of how much detail should you be going into? Like how far down do you go until you're kind of confident and ready? And I would caveat this with probably let's look at that from like the more startup perspective when you're sort of resource constrained.
Yeah, just from direct experience, I was the first employee at a company, right, and developing that go-to-market plan, and it was, me wearing all of the hats, right, with my founder and our board, right, and so you really have to focus, I think is really important. So what is our product? What is our market? You have to really dig into. So you've got your market analysis, you've got your customer segmentation, you have your buyer personas and your customer journey mapping. I think that's one of the things that I see far too often, that we're not putting enough emphasis on the customer journey and making sure that we don't have any gaps in the process, because the details, the devil's in the details. The magic is in the details. And if you don't have a detailed plan and even a checklist, I know Amanda and I have talked about this, you don't have that go-to-market checklist, you're going to forget things, right? And so all of this is going to feed you your tactical marketing plan, your sales strategy, your distribution, even governance, right? So as your organization is growing and making sure that cross-functionally across the organization, there's ownership and participation from those functional areas related to the product is very important. So I would say from a detail perspective, important to really drill down and focus on the details. Then how you utilize those details are certainly going to be different depending on the goals of the business, the overall business structure, and obviously the product that you're launching. And then I think the first part of the question, remind me, that was
Yeah, so it's does it change? How fixed is it? Should it be sort of this is our GTM and we go, or is it a refined growing document as you go forward?
the goal is to validate your strategy, right? As you're doing your market analysis and as you're going through the process to building that strategy and plan. So you should have confidence in all of the legwork that you've put in up front, that your strategy is sound and that's what you're going to market with. How fixed is it once you get in the market? That's really subject to change on response, right? What are you getting from a customer feedback perspective? How much traction are we getting? And I think it's important to realize that progress is not always linear. And so although we have this expectation as I'm going to launch this product and I'm going to have this hockey stick and they're going to be flying off the shelves, doesn't always work that way. And so it might be that we're solving maybe one problem, or we might be in a much smaller market than we really anticipated. And so do we want to elaborate and dig deeper into that market, or do we need to pivot is kind of always that question you need to continuously check in on.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Anybody else have other thoughts? Yeah.
Yeah, I would just I'm reminded by there's a Churchill quote, which is something like, the plan is of little importance, but the planning is essential. I think it's sort of doing all the work that we talked about and really thinking through that, but being flexible in the fact that your battle plan can change when your competitors change, or reg doesn't go as well as you think, or all of these things, or you're not gaining the traction in academia but biopharma loves it, or whatever it might be, but doing all of that work to really consistently and updating it, and I think you also learn a lot when you try to go out and start to actually do sales. And I mean, that's really where the product market fit rubber hits the road, so to speak. And I think you can gain a lot of understanding there about what's the pushback, what's the feedback, what are you hearing, and then starting to think about whether you have to do some refinements or even hard pivots. But yeah, I think all the work that goes into the plan is essential.
So how much time should a company put into their market research and go-to-market plan? Time and resources. Amanda, do you want to start?
Sure. I think as much time as you can afford, quite frankly, because this is your foundation, right? This is your plan that's going to get you to your product launch checklist. This is all of the work and all of the pillars that we've been talking about: market analysis, competitive assessment, segmentation, TAM, et cetera. If you don't have that, you're not going to launch your product on anything. So I think it's worth the due diligence to spend the time, and I can't really give a quantitative answer because, I'm the one in my past life who really put these things together by myself, of course, with the help of other people. And you do it until you're ready, until you feel comfortable with it. And you feel like you have enough and it doesn't have to be perfect all the time, but you want to feel a sense of confidence. So you're going forward and you believe in what you've done, and you don't necessarily have to pivot or change market segments because of uncertainty. On that note, I wanted to share just a quick story. As I was leading a marketing charge with an organization who found a lot of success in academia, and academia wasn't giving them enough money. So they decided that they wanted to go into industry. And so then basically drop the ball, move everything to industry, and it caused a lot of instability in the organization. And it was also right as COVID was hitting, there was no GTM for industry at all, right? They were using the same academic GTM as they were moving into industry, and it failed miserably. They had to pivot back to academia. restart their structure and ended up laying off a significant amount of staff. So don't always follow the money and don't always follow the gold shiny object, but do your due diligence, trust what you're doing, and understand that there is a lot of money in academia. It just depends on how you and where you approach it.
That's such an interesting story, right? Because although there are some parallels, right? The markets are vastly different, right? And so if you're going from research, you're thinking they're about innovation, ease of use, academic credibility, they're cost sensitive, right? They're working on the cutting edge of science. And so there's curiosity and there's engagement for new tools. Whereas industry, you're thinking, return on investment, efficiency, scalability, automation, right? So it's a very different value proposition. It's a very different positioning play. So your go-to-market is key.
Just curious, when you guys look at this, it feels like kind of to me the customer adoption life cycle. Your academia often is the early adopters. They don't care about the loose edges, but maybe industry is more transitioning into the more stable buyers. They have very different buying needs and personas, right?
Yeah, and I think what you see in, biopharma in particular, the stability is really key to them. And so I think it's a challenge as a small, unproven company because, if biopharma is including this into some process that's really essential for launching a drug, or if it's cell and gene therapy and it's part of the actual manufacturing process, and they're going to really look hard at you and say, are you going to be around in 2 years? Like we're going to launch this drug. And it's going to be a problem if, for whatever reason, you haven't made it and now we have to find a new supplier and we may have to go back and do something with reg and do some bridging studies. And so I think to the points raised, I think understanding sort of what they need to get comfortable with you, and it can be quite different than academia. And so I think to the points of, those go-to-market strategies can be quite different. And that's maybe where you need a partner. You need a thermo or someone who's going to give you the brand, the brand, such a strong brand name halo effect for your product, or they might help actually with managing sort of the longevity of your product, et cetera. So.
Okay. So I'd like to move into sort of market research a little bit more. So can you guys talk about some tools early stage companies can use to get or develop market research? I know it comes in a lot of flavors and styles, but maybe you could talk about some of the different types of market research. Because I'm always asked, like, hey Jim, do you have a market research report for X, Y, or Z? But market research is more than that, right?
Yeah, I can maybe start here. I would look. There's a couple of different things you can look at. Market reports. I mean, we published a bunch in the space. Not to be self-promoting, but I mean, it's an area that we cover, and we have a tools report that we're very proud of, and I think those can be very helpful because they can provide numbers around specific markets, and they can help you think about TAMs and your serviceable addressable market, who the competitive landscape are. I think they can be a real quick win to get up to speed and also demonstrate to investors that the space that you're getting into and sort of what's valued, and then you can go into more bespoke work. I think a lot of startups will use their network. There could be I think obviously the BioTools Incubator, I think is a great network. There's a lot of industry people, including people on the phone here, that are at potential end stage customers for these companies. And so I would leverage them. I would just make sure, that there can be bias. You have to kind of think through that and make sure that you're not getting one perspective that's not fully reflective of the market. And then you can go, we have services and tools for doing self-service market voice customer market research. That's pretty cost effective. But yeah, I think trying, and I don't think you need, we'll do a project for strategic where we talk to 50 to 100 people. I don't think that's what you need here often enough. I think it's if you're really thoughtful, like about what customer segments you're looking at, then if you talk to 5 to 10 people and they're reputable, that can speak a lot to your plan and also give confidence to investors that, okay, there's really something here. Someone at Pfizer said this is really interesting. I'm not committed to buying it. I haven't signed up for that, but I've looked at this and it's clearly addressing the unmet need that we have in biopharma, and that starts to really, for an invest on my investor hat, that makes me much more comfortable thinking about putting money into a company where, one, it also shows the maturity and experience of the team that they've done that work. It's just signaling to me that they know what they're doing, and then but it also starts to help de-risk that product and that investment, if they've been able to get good voice of customer feedback.
That's great. So when I had my company, we had a SBIR phase one through the National Cancer Institute at the NIH. And at the time, and I don't know if they still do this, but at the time, one of the things they did as being an SBIR beneficiary was you could ask for a free market research study. And they would hire a group to go do a detailed market research. They'd interview, I don't remember, 8, 10, 12 people in the field, from academia to industry, and they do interviews, they'd provide that, they do a whole range of stuff, and they'd give it to you at the end. And as we were moving closer to our market launch, we did another market research study. We hired actually the same consultant. We brought him back, and he did another study for us. But what was cool about it was each time we did it, we got customers. Like people were like, "Oh, this is great! Like, I'm hearing about it, but like, I want to know more. I want to like talk to this company. Like, this sounds like it solves a real problem." And so, for me, like looking at the budget and the spend, and yeah, we did spend money on the second one, but it was also just like it was customer development too. In a way, it served two purposes. So that was, if you do it right, there's multiple benefits to doing these things, in terms of like KOLs and recruiting, new interested parties.
Yeah, if I could jump in here, this is something we've done quite a bit of. I mean, we try, when we're hired, we want to get an independent view. So we're very careful about pitching a product. But what we've done in a lot of cases where we've done independent work for our client, really trying to understand, what's the product market fit, what's the likelihood of adoption. We've come back, blinded, and then we've come back and asked interviewees like, wow, you're really excited about this. You rated it a 7 out of 7, likely to, would you be open to the client actually contacting you? And a lot of times people who are really interested in the product, they're really interested. They're often, their job is often to look for new technologies, right? They're competing against other companies, and everyone's looking for an edge, right? And then it's very satisfying for me to like come back to a client and say like, hey, we got this call, like drop everything, call MD Anderson. There's a guy there who's like wants to buy your product today. Then they feel good about there's good ROI for a client who's spending, quite a bit of money on this kind of research. So I definitely think if you can build that into the plan, but do it, doing it in a way where it's not, you don't want the market research to come off as a sales pitch, because
Yeah.
that'll get a very different response, and likelihood. Also, you might get very biased information, and you really want it to be very independent and thoughtful, and reflective of the market, but you can use it in a way, as you mentioned, Jim, to actually do lead generation for yourself.
Kimberly, I've got a question for you. So, do you have any stories? I'd love to hear a story about a time when you kind of did market research and it changed your view. Like you learned something that was deeply impactful to your strategy, and how that kind of was integrated and affected, and how you kind of came across that data point.
Yeah, I was kind of noodling on this morning. I think one of the most interesting and impactful journeys that I went on was when I was in blood products for bioresearch, and we were selling, these were more consumable products. So, not in terms of like a capital equipment or, a device, but in terms of consumable for further manufacture. We had a really difficult supply chain, and our supply chain was healthy human donors. And so I led an initiative that was really aimed at understanding how can we enhance the accessibility to healthy human donors for the donation of blood products? How can we understand their motivations so that we can enhance our product offering to our customers? And so what we did was we brought in a third party to develop a market survey, because what we learned is as technology becomes more accessible, because we're in an app-based world, the process to recruit donors changes. And so we needed to develop an app to then gain access to those donors, because people don't answer the phone, right? So we worked with a third party to do a market survey because we wanted a broad sample to understand, geographic location, proximity to donations, demographics, motivations, how they want to be contacted, how they consume data. And then we combined that with in-depth interviews with donors, and internal interviews with, across the business, cross-functionally, of who really touches the journey of the product, to understand how their day-to-day looks, what systems they use, what challenges to address. And then we translated that into a customer journey map, so we could visualize the steps of, what a donor takes to be part of the product and the value that we're providing on the back end to customers. And this process was wildly successful. We created an app to, reach more donors. We were able to target demographics to support customer needs, for their research. So all in all, it was a really effective strategy, but it comes down to really engaging with your target customer, your target prospect, and really understanding what those pain points and challenges are in order to solve the problem.
That's great. Amanda, do you have any advice from your experience in terms of like what type of things does a company want to maybe do themselves, and what things should they definitely consider not doing themselves, or what are sort of the pros and cons that you would sort of go through and consider when you're sort of thinking about how you want to actually build out your data?
Yeah, I think from experience, certainly market research is something you could potentially outsource. I think Dusty Bio has some great offerings, but uh, because of the way things are right now with AI and self searches, that you can't be too sure that the data that you're getting is legitimate. And so being able to take that data and then of course validate it with VOC, or, small handfuls of people, online interviews that can easily be done over social media, those things are really important. Um, and I forgot your question, Jim. I was just going off on a tangent.
Um, it's how much do the companies want to do themselves,
Oh yeah,
and
sorry.
how do they want to kind of consider taking on or not taking on
Yeah.
certain aspects of it?
So I think market research is certainly something you can outsource, because there are reputable organizations that can do that. Um, Finding KOLs, it depends on how robust your team is and the networks that they have. Competitive assessment, I think, is something you can do internally. You just have to be really honest with yourselves and what you're building, and whether or not, for example, you're really offering a premium product, or you're a me too with, that's more affordable. Um, Beta testing, I think, is also important. You can do that internally. Segmentation, I think, because people typically avoid this might be also something you can consider outsourcing. And then, of course, even just the basic marketing foundation, messaging, personas, strategic narrative. If you have the capacity to do it internal, it's certainly less expensive, but you can always outsource that as well. So I think it really depends on what your surface and selling, what your servicer or what you were servicing or selling. But those are the things that I think, in my experience, have been pretty common to outsource and to keep in-house.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm probably biased here. It's my business to do outsource work. Obviously, we're very proud of being able to do independent work. And I've come back to a lot of senior executives, a lot of boards, and said, you're in from, and with a viewpoint that is completely different to them. And there's always like pressure to change that perspective, but that's we come back with sort of what we think is the market truth. And we're not going to back down from that. I'm not putting my name, our company name that we built over 10 years on something that's just, a validation of someone's agenda. I will say that's the hard part of doing it internally, is managing the agendas. And so I think it can be done. I think the way to do it is, make sure that there's sort of an audit trail of everything, in terms of what questions are being asked, like transcripts, like sort of everything's open for people to review, because I just think I often, it happens a lot where I see there's different agendas within companies. Probably the most painful projects we've ever worked on have been when you have like massively differing agendas, and it becomes more of a group therapy session than actually doing strategic consulting work, but part of the job. But yeah, I think a product manager can have an agenda versus a CEO versus an investor, and so I'm seeing that on different projects right now where there's differences of opinion there, and sort of navigating that and trying to really use the data to really bring to light what we think is the ground truth. and sort of unvarnished from opinion. Because
Yeah.
I think that's the danger of doing a lot of work in house is like who's doing it and what sort of agendas they are, and they don't have to be malicious agendas. It's just personalities, right? Or job security, or whatever it is. Or hey, I'm really excited about the product in this application for whatever reason, and you sort of hear only what you want to hear, and you discount other things. And so we know there's tons of cognitive biases out there, right? And I think you really have to just be and recognize they exist, recognize what they might be, and sort of navigate them in a way that you can come to something that's what we would say is like the ground truth.
Well, that kind of feeds into one of my final questions for this segment, which I'll bump up here a little bit, which is what are what are kind of some of the tips to avoid in market research? And you just touched on a number of them right there, but what are things people should be cognizant of and watch out for when they're looking and doing and evaluating, creating kind of market research?
Have clear objectives. So really know your why. And I think that why it's really important to socialize that right across the executive team, across the organization. So everyone's aligned on the common goal. Because before you dig into the research, if you don't define what you want to learn, then you're just data mining, right? And then how are you going to contextualize and how are you going to consolidate that data and make sense of it if you're just, randomly selecting data? But then that also leads to bias. I think that there's a good intentional outsourcing, I call it. Like you want to make sure the things that you can do in house to be capital efficient. I think that's really important, but you also need to think about, are the customers and are my target customers and are the people that I'm speaking to, because they're in my network, because I have a great relationship with them, how open and honest, not honest, but like how their feedback that you're giving to me. If my baby's ugly, are you going to tell me my baby's ugly, or are you going to tell a third party that my baby's ugly, right? And so I think that there's a little bit of a balance that you have to take into consideration.
Yeah, I think maybe part of it is like really being open to being wrong. Um, that's really hard. Humans do not like to be we do not like to be wrong.
What's that
Especially
phrase? Loosely held, strong convictions, right?
yeah, I think that's right. And really try to be open. Yeah. And there is danger, a lot of times people say, oh, I'm going to use this research to validate X, Y, or Z, validate this the right customer segment. And that can be helpful, but do it in a way in which you're open to the fact that like maybe it's not the right customer segment. Maybe there's a better opportunity. And the goal of the research is to find the best product market fit and and drive adoption and be successful, right? I mean, not confirm whether you think you were right or not. I think there's just yeah, I think managing sort of the cognitive bias is really the hard part, and just really understanding sort of all the agendas that ground truth can be filtered through to come up with a very different perspective of what it
Yeah.
is. So I think those are the hard part of doing that work, and just making sure that you're really there can be an echo chamber with companies, right? They have SAB, scientific advisory boards, or other people involved in the company, and all of a sudden it can be, oh yeah, this is what the market is, and all of a sudden, and then we come in and we're like, that's surprising to us that that's the market, but we're open to it. But let's, we'll put it in as a hypothesis. We're going to test it and understand it. But I think you can end up in these situations where there's a lot of people, yeah, the echo chamber, and yeah, so I think just sort of managing all of that is the hard part of doing this research.
Amanda, one of the challenges with, a lot of these companies, especially, spinning out from university, where often, it's like there's two ways to build a company. You can be a problem in search of a solution, or, a solution in search of a problem. A lot of our companies, they're sometimes, they're solutions in search of problems, which is the harder way to build a business, but it's definitely doable. But with that in mind, kind of looking at market research, we've talked about kind of interviewing customers and things like that. But I think a big problem, a big challenge is when you've got a broadly applicable tool, how do you sort of help narrow the field? How do you identify maybe what are the hot areas? What are areas that maybe this would have a bigger impact in? What are the areas that are growing faster? How do you sort of get data to help understand kind of key trends in the market where you maybe want to focus your data and your research to support market entry?
So definitely narrowing that down. I mean, of course, there isn't necessarily a silver bullet. It's going to be a combination of activities. You can look at different trends and different market research reports and try to glean um, things from there. You want to talk to KOLs, you want to talk to industry leaders, and of course, you want to talk to your friendlies in running ideas by those groups of people to see whether or not this is a viable option for you and a viable option for you to go down this road. So I think it's going to have to be, yeah, definitely a combination of those things I mentioned. And then again, I sound like a broken record, but going back to validating that. So whether you validate that with, an external resource or you figure it out on your own, there are going to be paths that are a lot easier and paths that are more difficult. But I think that's an approach that people are just going to have to take. And there is a side of me that does believe in a company doing their own homework at least first. So at least trying to put a stake in the ground and saying, okay, this is what we think, this is why, this is the problem we're solving, this is what we want to do, and then maybe validating that with an external company, just to make sure they're on the right path, or multiple external companies for that matter, just to double check. Because I do think it's, as you mentioned, Jim, it's much more difficult to find a solution for a company versus then building based on a problem itself.
Yeah, I mean, we often work with clients on this. One of the ways you can start to think about it is, sort of put together what might be the laundry, like look at it from an application space. I think that's often a great way to start mapping technology to something, because then the applications often will then help you with the customer. But if you start to think about, you can generally come up with like a set of applications for technology, either because this technology is probably similar to something else. Hopefully it's a better, cheaper, faster kind of situation. And then you can start to lay out, here's 10 applications or 20, right? And you can literally just create like a spreadsheet of that, and you could start evaluating that on some basic metrics. And even if you don't have like an exact number, you can probably, we do a lot of stuff which is we call heat maps, right? It's like stoplight, red, yellow, green. You have a sense of like how big some of these markets are, or just relative scale. And that's okay, because that can help just start to triage things. So you can say, okay, let's start with market size and growth. Is this a big market? Is it growing fast? What's the competitive landscape look like? Is it super fragmented? Is it very, very competitive with like big players? You know, your technology fit with that? How differentiated might you be for that application? You can start to sort of sketch that out, I think, often internally. I mean, that's something we help clients do. And then you can do some basic, it's kind of like heat map math. You say, okay, well, you got two reds and a yellow, maybe you get 1 point for red and 2 points for yellow and 3 points for green. And you say, well, you can get really fancy and say market growth should be weighted over competitive, whatever. But if you just keep it really simple, you can start to kind of filter these down and say, okay, well, we think it looks like, this product seems to be heading more in an academic setting for basic science research or early stage exploratory work. And then that's where you would start to actually build your market research campaign around that. But I think there's a lot you can do as a company. And as I said, I think it also signals to, if you're an investor, like, okay, they've actually put some thought into this. And versus when you start talking to a company and they're like, they're in every different direction, you go, like this is, I'm a little worried here about putting money into a company that's going to try to pursue like everything, or we're going to build the next, next gen sequencer. Like, or we're going to go into early cancer detection. Like, you can do that. You better have a lot of money to do it. But, so I think you can do some basic things internally, and then you could go to other people. I mean, we do that work sometimes, for friends of the firm, like we'll do it for free. Just like, hey, here's one slide that we put in PowerPoint or an Excel, or you can use a Google sheet or whatever it is. Like, does this look about right? Like, yeah, or maybe your fit is probably not as good here, or change that, but it, looks right, or and then you can actually go from there and do good work. Yeah. So hopefully it's helpful.
It's great. Does this market research, especially when you're sort of talking to the customers, it's kind of like earlier the early stages of the company too are just doing customer discovery. It's kind of a similar phase, but is that stuff that pretty much do you think it needs to be done kind of face to face in a conversation? Are there surveys that are helpful? What are some other sort of mechanisms and tools you can use to connect and engage and get viable, useful data from these demographics?
I mean, I've used surveys and voice of customer. We've also done focus groups and advisory groups. That's always been great. When I was at Seahorse, we had a novel technology that changed the way that you interrogate cellular metabolism. So we would go to societies, say a 500 member society that looked at metabolic pathways, not to pitch the technology, but to really identify if a problem exists. Because if I had a solution to a problem, would you be interested, right? So really starting to understand and develop, who is the customer, what is the problem I'm solving to feed the development path, right? As well, like very, very early on. We've also done, very in-depth interviews, with target customers, and that's always been a really great experience. You're coming in and you're mapping the customer journey. Again, going back to that, I think that exercise is often overlooked because it's not just about what the product serves and the purpose and the solution that it provides, but it's the overall product package that is going to affect the customer. It comes down to the user experience. It comes down to how you're shipping the product to them, how they're receiving the product, where they're storing the product. So there's so many layers to it that you're not going to get from a market report. You're only going to get that from really digging into those interviews with, users of the technology.
Mm-hmm.
I could add, I
Yeah.
think
Okay.
one other interesting place, and this does require some digging, are community forums. So oftentimes you can find and validate your problems as an anonymous listener or as part of a group. And sometimes you don't even need to ask the question because they're very open about problems that they're having. And people are very open about ways in which they want to address, solve those problems. So um, Reddit is a good example. LinkedIn groups are a good example. I wouldn't so much, I mean, not necessarily, it depends on the Facebook group, but there are a ton of groups that we have access to where we can actually uncover insights that, might have been overlooked or would actually lead us down a path to add something else to our bio tools roadmap. So, and those are easy to listen in on, and they're easy to find insights from.
Yeah, I think you want to sort of tailor the approach a bit to, I mean, it's sort of like in the research community, right? Like exploratory versus translational versus like clinical, right? It's almost the similar kind of workflow. And I think similar to there, you use different tools and technologies. I think the approaches differ. When you're earlier stage, you want to go broad. I think that's where, the forums could be great to get unmet needs. I think talking to people is more helpful and having open-ended conversations and really understanding. Tell me about your day. Tell me, like, walk me through. Like, you walk in the morning, you've had your coffee. What do you do now? Like, okay, I unbox these boxes. There's so many boxes, so like I have to unbox all these boxes from Illumina for all the reagents, right? Those was like a big win. That Illumina on the recent. Some of the recent product advances actually shrunk the number of boxes they ship things in. And so that's something you would only pick up is if you actually have that conversation and ask really open-ended and just be really curious as someone doing the interviews. But then as you progress and say you have a product concept or a product prototype, are you trying to fine-tune product specs? Then you could do quantitative surveys, you can do conjoints, you can do all these things around that are much more in a narrower set of options. Or or if you want to get likelihood to adopt and all that, then the approach changes, right? And then you don't necessarily need face-to-face or exploratory research. You're really doing, I have this shiny object, it's called X, product X, what do people think about it? How would they change it? If it's blue or red, which would you prefer? If it's got this toggle versus that, which do you prefer? And then you can really hone down. So I think you tailor it a bit based on where you're at in the process, I think is the point.
That's great. So let's fast forward a little bit on our timeline. So we've done our market research. Now we're going back to our go-to-market strategy development, and we're trying to feed that data in. So, um, how do you sort of prioritize this customer feedback, which is probably not going to be consistent? How do you integrate that into your product development and go-to-market strategy? This sort of this massive of information. Kimberly, you can start.
Yeah, I like to create sort of a feedback matrix. So you can use that cross-functionally across the organization because you've got different stakeholders that are going to be touching the product, right? You've got marketing, engineering, R&D, customer support, sales, right? And I'm visual by nature, so I want to capture, categorize, quantify, and assess impact. Assessing impact is really critical when you're looking at feedback because you don't want to go on a tangent for something that's ultimately not going to influence the success of the product, but also that it's aligned with your business goals and your long-term vision. Because, for example, a user might say that they want highly customized features that aren't part of your product today, but the development cost is going to outweigh the potential benefit in the market, right? And so you really have to look at each piece of feedback and see how that aligns with the overall strategy and if it's worth pursuing. So I like to do a feedback matrix so that you can have actions associated.
So it's not all your gut. You don't just have the feeling of,
Yeah, and like if a customer highlights a specific benefit, for example, you can emphasize that in your marketing materials. You can have a backlog of your features for engineering. And so it's, is this going to be my version 2.0? Is this going to be a software release? Is this going to be a need to do now, right, for this product to be viable in the market, right? So you have to have more of like an impact score, again, while keeping line of sight to what we can afford to do and where we can expend resources.
Amanda, David, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think
Yeah, I
the
mean,
matrix.
okay.
No, go ahead, David. It's fine.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to point to, I think it's really goes back to a lot of the concepts we were talking about around what's the product market fit, where do we think the application, in tools, I think it's a lot of application driven, what applications are we going to really pursue? Who's the customer for that? Who are we competing against? What are the proof points that we need? What are the positioning against, these other competitors looking like? And I think that sort of then, builds in. But I think my colleagues take a lot of that further downstream in terms of engineering and marketing, et cetera. So I'll let them speak.
Yeah, no, I was gonna agree with Kimmy. I think a matrix is a good idea. I mean, certain aspects of feedbacks are for development, and certain aspects of feedback are for C-levels, and certain aspects of feedback are for marketing. So I think it depends on what that feedback is. And I think most importantly with customer feedback, so because, you know, they're taking their time, they're taking a survey, or you're talking to them constantly about what you need, what they need. I think it's important to have a closed loop session as well, thanking them all the time, making sure that they know that they're valuable, because as we discussed, this is an ongoing process. And so I think just, it's easy for us to just always seek feedback, but I think it's important to let the customers know that they are important. We're listening to you. And if it's just a quick note, or if it's in, however you want to do that, a coffee gift card or whatnot, I think it's important just to show appreciation as well, because we're also taking from them. So having that cycle is really important.
That's great. When you're talking to a customer, or doing sort of these studies, I know that the goals, the details will probably vary, but one of our questions from the cohort is what are your go-to questions? What are some of the good questions you like to ask that unlock information, secrets, and things that you want to learn? Anybody have favorites?
I, I have a couple. I mean, I would say too, how are you engaging with the client, right? Because you want to tailor your objectives, right, to the feedback that you're looking for. So, our open-ended questions, I think, are best, right? You don't want to necessarily like lead the witness and, lead to bias. So, some of the things that I like to ask is, compared to other bio tools that you've used for, X application, how would you describe the value of using this product in your workflow? So you're really getting insight into how are they using the product, and how is it, how does it stack up against the competition, or what pain points or problems does this problem solve for you? and even thinking of users who would benefit most from, this product. Can you describe their typical challenges or their priorities? Another way would be if you're, a customer has purchased a product or has participated in a service that you offer, right? A simple survey after completion could be, what did you learn from us? What did you like about working with us? Where can we improve? So it's very like simple questions that aren't necessarily guiding them, but allowing them to really provide that open feedback.
One of my favorites is, depending on the application or research areas, what would you do if you didn't have this? What would your day look like? What would your research look like if you no longer had this product that you bought from us, or service that you purchased from us? And I think that often allows them to provide a lot of information, or none at all, depending on what it is. So you can quickly, and then you can ask follow-up questions from there, but you can quickly hone in on, well, my product's really valuable in ways that I would never have guessed from what they said. Or, oh, we're kind of running the mill and they bought us because we're less expensive, but okay, that's room for us to improve, right?
Without your product,
Yeah.
I wouldn't have time to get my second cup of coffee.
Yes. Yeah. That's a lot of value,
Yeah.
that a lot of value.
Yeah, I think of it if you're doing more like the exploratory work that's sort of leading to a product, definitely it's mentioned, open-ended questions. What are your pain points, unmet needs? What keeps you up at night? Um, and then when you're talking about a specific product, it can even be a lot of times, the work we're doing, we are talking about specific applications or use cases. It's like where else, but you're talking to a lot of really smart people, right? And who are scientists and you're intellectually curious. It's like, where else could you imagine this being used? Like, is there anything like just anything, like throw out any ideas you have, and then you can start to actually, explore sort of outside of that space that you may have constrained the conversation around. Okay, well, we really want to program these 3 use cases, but we're getting a lot of interesting feedback that it could be really used in this other one that we hadn't really talked about, and that could open the door to something really interesting and unlock maybe a new use case or maybe a second generation product or all these things that can, because you've been intellectually curious, you sort of pick up on something new.
Awesome. So we only have a few minutes left. Excuse me, but to wrap this up, the last question I have is kind of, how do you know when your strategy is working? How do you track it, manage it? Are there critical KPIs that you like to look at? What's the feedback mechanism as you're sort of executing? Kimberly, you could probably start first, or Amanda, either.
I think obviously the obvious major KPI, of course, is how much revenue are we bringing in based on quarter and yearly. But I also think it's important to look at market share, especially market share capture. Are you in the US or have you expanded beyond that? What's your geographical reach? I think really important are referrals. So how many referrals do you have? Because referral business is big, and once you start getting a lot of referrals, you can get more inbound traffic as well. And then repeat customers, and on top of that, repeat customers who are buying more than just one product. So I think those are all together can be stated as these are KPIs that we look at. I mean, you can break down every single aspect of the business and assign KPIs to each individual segment as well, which a lot of companies do, and it's important. But I think at a high level, that those are the main.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, at the end of the day, success is sales, but it's also, again, progress is never linear. So if you're not necessarily getting that first sale out the gate, maybe you haven't established your sales cycle appropriately. Maybe you underestimated how fast you were going to turn those sales, right? So I think looking deep into, how effective your go-to-market strategy is it's, I mean, it's more than just sales, but it's like the KPIs are largely going to be organizationally driven. And I think success is also going to be stakeholder dependent. And so one of the things that, we did when we were launching our last tool was, we also had, quality KPIs, because even though you're selling units, if your, mean time between failure is a week, for example, I wouldn't say that that's a successful go-to-market strategy or a successful product launch, right? Because maybe we missed some things in development. So I think, looking across the organization, not just sales, is just as equally important.
Awesome. David, do you want the last
Yeah.
word?
Yeah, I mean, I think it often gets, you have to tailor it, right, a bit to like what the business model is, who the customer is, all these things. But I think a lot of the metrics, things we've been talking about, customer retention, are the customer happiness, right? There's NPS or various ways to measure that. Yeah, you want your customer to be happy. You want them to keep coming back to you. You want them to be spending more. You want them to be spreading, more people within your one biopharma. Now there's labs down the hall that are now using your products. So there's like word of mouth spreading, all those things. But yeah, I think it does. It really depends a bit on you have to kind of tailor it to the situation. And there's a lot of, you can look up easily like what are all the different sort of metrics for various businesses, SaaS businesses, the research tools, businesses, et cetera. And I think it's really thinking about like what your goals are and aligning the metrics to that. Because sometimes, okay, the goal is like, we want to raise a Series A, and so we need to show what are the metrics we need to show to get investors excited about that. Is it we get out of the one early access customer we have, so that's now your metric, or some version of that, right? So I think it really ties to sort of what your near term and ultimately long term goals are.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, guys. That's time for our webinar today. I really